In a time of great turmoil, of great darkness, after civil wars lasting almost a decade, the monarchy of the British Isles was promptly extirpated by the will of its people. This is the tale of a king slain by his very own subjects.
In 1625, Charles I, King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, ascended to the throne. He firmly believed in a top-down hierarchy and in his divine right to rule. King Charles rejected the power of Parliament and chose to levy taxes without its approval. Because of his policies, he was called a tyrant. By continually refusing to recognize the authority of Parliament, he ignited the First English Civil War. The First English Civil War pitted the king against Parliament. The parliamentarian New Model Army, unlike its immediate predecessors, boasted a professional officer corps and a more unified outlook, for soldiers could be deployed anywhere in the country, as opposed to exclusively fighting in their local area. When Parliament and the New Model Army prevailed in the First English Civil War, the King of England allied with Scotland to invade his own country and make war upon his own people in the Second English Civil War. Although Parliament was victorious, the king's actions radicalized many. These newly radicalized soldiers and politicians took control of the English government. The New Model Army refused entry to moderate politicians in the House of Commons, and this rump parliament declared its supremacy, fully ignoring the House of Lords and the monarchy.
The trial of Charles I of England furthered political rights and responsibilities, setting a precedent for expanding them even more by greatly bolstering the theory of popular sovereignty and separating the crown from the nation.
Charles I was held under house arrest by the parliamentarians until Cornet George Joyce seized him from Holdenby in the name of the New Model Army. However, the parliamentarians faced a divide amongst themselves, leading an eager Charles to attempt to exploit the widening divisions. A series of fruitless negotiations took place, and Charles arrived at the conclusion that it would be in his best interests to flee, perhaps to France or Germany. Nevertheless, the parliamentary governor of the Isle of Wight, Colonel Robert Hammond, confined Charles to a castle, informing Parliament of his capture. The king was brought before the High Court of Justice, and Solicitor General John Cook, essentially a prosecutor, charged him with high treason against the realm of England, tyranny, treachery, and being a public enemy. When asked to answer for these charges, Charles I refused to enter his plea. Instead, he questioned the High Court's dominance, asking under what authority they have that power. He proclaimed, "When I have understood the lawfulness of the authority, I will make my answer. In the meantime, remember that I am your king." With this tactic, he positioned himself as a defender of the rights of the people, by pointing out that he was being tried by an unlawful body. The High Court answered that he was being tried in the name of the people of England. In truth, under the previously established legal regime, the High Court could be described as a sham. It was sanctioned only by a House of Commons that had been purged of dissenters, and there was no precedent for trying a king. Indeed, a key figure in the Civil War, even winning the key battle of Naseby, Lord Thomas Fairfax, Commander-in-Chief of the New Model Army, refused to participate in the trial, for he became disillusioned with Cromwell's policies. Under English law, the parliaments and courts got, and still do get, their power from the monarch. The High Court, however, wanted to set a new precedent of popular sovereignty as opposed to the divine right to rule. This left Lord President Bradshaw in a conundrum. Under English law, if the defendant refused to enter his plea, he could be tortured until he changed his mind. However, the High Court was afraid that doing so could lead to riots in favor of the king. Eventually, Bradshaw found a solution. Charles, King of England, was found in contempt of court. Neither his presence at the trial nor his plea were required. When all was said and done, Oliver Cromwell, through a combination of threats and promises, was able to obtain a death warrant, signed by about half the members of the court present.
Traditionally, these crimes that Charles I was charged with could not be leveled against the king, for the king was the source of all judicial and legislative power. Under the previous system, the king was supreme, and charging him with a crime would be nonsensical. Similarly, the definition of treason was treachery against one's king. King Charles I being tried for treason against himself would have been absolutely ridiculous. The High Court of Justice was trying to establish a new status quo. They defined treason as treachery against the nation itself, and it claimed power from the will of the people. In short, it separated the idea of king and country, whilst simultaneously fostering the growth of the idea of popular sovereignty. It also decreased monarchical power in favor of the elected parliament. Since the time of Julius Caesar's overthrow of the Roman Republic, the system of democracy had largely remained dormant. Examples of democratic governments were few and far between. They were deposed in favor of grand kings claiming to be divine representatives on earth. In Britain, at least, this tide was beginning to turn. The foundations of the modern liberal democratic movement had their seeds in this trial. Kings were no longer unassailable, and their prerogatives no longer overrode all others. England began its move towards popular sovereignty, and out of that shift was born a great experiment on the American continent, recalling the institutions of ancient Rome and serving as a crack in the dam that unleashed a wave of democracy over the world. The United Kingdom, meanwhile, became the preeminent defender of democratic ideals on the European continent, fostering the ascendancy of democracy. During the Middle Ages, a king was seen as almost an owner of his country. He could trade territory on a whim, and the people on his territory were entirely beholden to him. Many monarchs ruled as autocrats, that is to say that they had absolute power. They controlled everything within their borders. The average person was held in a form of servitude wherein they could not leave the land they lived on. They were forced to farm it, and they had to give a portion of their harvest to the king. Charles I's trial appended this entirely. A king no longer owned his country, and he served at the pleasure of the people. Charles I affirmed in his trial that, quote, "a subject and a sovereign are clean different things," end quote. This can be juxtaposed to, quote, "a king and a country were clean different things," end quote, for that was a precedent that stood the test of time and the test of the executioner's axe. The people reigned supreme, and no longer were they so beholden to their sovereign. The people realized that they represented the overwhelming majority of the population, and they became convinced that they had the right to rise up and rule their own destiny. Monarchs around the world were put on notice. If they tried to infringe on the rights of their people, they could be deposed. Freedom would reign. The rights and responsibilities of English subjects and people around the world were unmistakably increased as a result of this momentous trial. It was the right and responsibility of the people to govern themselves. It was their right and responsibility to rebel against tyranny, even if it meant executing a king. To be clear, this certainly did not happen overnight, but the English Civil Wars and the trial of King Charles I were important milestones in the evolution of British democracy. In the centuries following the trial, the ideas of popular sovereignty were expanded upon to increase parliamentary power, making it more democratic, and spread such advancements far and wide. Soon, people were being guaranteed certain protected political rights. They had the right to determine the future of their own country. They had the right to have justice done unto them by their peers rather than a king, and they were given new corresponding responsibilities to make those rights possible. This trial was the genesis of many of the political rights and responsibilities we hold today, because it popularized the philosophy that gave them to us: the rule of the people. In the aftermath of the trial, a new Republican government under the dictatorship of Oliver Cromwell took power. Ironically, as Lord Protector, he was a monarch except in name only, completely defeating Charles II, the son of the executed King Charles I, and a Scotsman in the Third English Civil War. After Cromwell's death, however, Charles II became the monarch. Out of pure spite and as a symbol to revolutionaries, Charles II performed posthumous executions on key figures such as Oliver Cromwell, Judge John Bradshaw, and General of the Parliamentarian Army Henry Ireton. Additionally, he hanged, drew, and quartered all of the remaining regicides. The son of Charles II, James II and VII, was ousted for being a Catholic in favor of William of Orange, who gained parliamentary support in exchange for increasing its power. Monarchical influence declined greatly during the reigns of William of Orange and especially George I, who came from Hanover and did not even speak English. Today, the days of glory and power for the monarchy in England are confined to the history books and National History Day projects.